Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We got Dan Donovan with us today. He is the editor and publisher of Ottawa Life magazine. He's a former political staffer on Parliament Hill. He's a former stand-up comic, so he's got a really interesting background, and he's also a great commentator on what's going on in Canada from a political standpoint, from a news standpoint, current event standpoint. And so I thought it'd be great as we celebrate Canada Day to check in with Dan as to what's going on. So Dan, maybe we could start on the most important, news from an economic standpoint. Most recently, is that the trade talks with Trump are back on hold because he's objecting to the digital services tax and says that it's completely inappropriate. What do you think of that?
Well, it's interesting. I think it shows on one level a big misread by our government in terms of course, it's hard to read anything when it comes to Donald Trump. And of course, he changes not, I wouldn't say from day to day or week to week or month to month or even minute to minute. He's more like second to second guy, and the whole thing can change. But I think on this one, and we can talk about a lot of things about the new Carney government, Brian. And I certainly don't want to start on a negative foot because they're doing a number of things right. However, on this, cue the outrage in some quarters in Canada. But I think this just goes to prove again that, the Trudeau government took a lot of stupid pills, and this was one of the biggest ones, this tax. This is a tax from the previous government before the election that the Carney government did not get rid of. Now, I can get into the minutiae of it, but I don't want to bore your listeners, but I'll say two things. Number one, this is a regressive and horrible tax. Number two, if you want to understand that, just read Michael Geist's piece about this. Michael Geist is the subject matter expert on online issues related to journalism in Canada. He's a lawyer. He's a professor at Ottawa U. He's appeared before the Parliamentary Committee. He's the person who said before they passed the Online Journalism Act, do not pass this act. It will be a disaster. And because of that tax, over 250 Canadian digital platforms have gone under. It supported legacy media like CTV, Bell, and Global. And this tax is affiliated with that. It's from the same house, if you will. And we're the only country doing this. So the Americans are just having none of it, and it's a regressive tax. It's I think, pardon?
Why is it regressive?
Well, it's regressive because it's trying to force private sector companies that are not in Canada to take their money and to spend that money through this cash and grab tax on Canadian production in Canada. And they're trying to force other companies. It's a really blatant attempt to do that. Now, if we want Canadian products and film and other podcast videos on those networks, then we need to create in our own country funds to do that. But to sort of surreptitiously go out and blackmail companies and say, if you don't, you're going to pay this tax or else. And of course, then they put it on the consumer in Canada. These taxes go right to the consumers. So they go right to you and me and families. And of course, families right now are dealing with, that's the other side of it. The domestic side of the tax is also bad. It's very difficult, and it's in the affordability environment in Canada is very harsh on families. So they're nickel and diming people to death to try to achieve this realization of getting money for the Canadian culture industry. And there are other ways to do
I
it.
don't understand it. If Trump can put on a 25% tariff on steel, on aluminum, on 10% on a whole bunch of other things to try to incentivize companies to start manufacturing in the United States, which is his stated goal, why can't Canada put a 3% tax on digital services to try to incentivize Facebook and Google and digital service providers? The incentive to have some of their content produced in Canada. Why doesn't that make sense?
Well, I think it is about sense, and it's about dollars, and it's about jobs, and it's about money, and it's about being smart. And this is why I say You got to be smart in terms of how you adjudicate these things, and that kind of a tax is not an impact tax in terms of how it's going to affect Canadians in our culture industry, but it's obviously an incendiary tax when it comes to Mr. Trump and his administration. Now, sure, they can put taxes on other things, and an ability to respond to them in certain areas, but it should be in serious areas. This is an area that is so blatantly is such a cash grab. It's not strategic at all, and like, don't take my word for it. Pretty well every subject matter expert on this in the country who is taken seriously and to appear before a parliamentary committee said, "Do not do this tax." And remember, we're putting a lot of other taxes already for the Canadian culture industry, including $1.5 billion a year to the CBC. We have the Online Journalism Act, which is also actually another regressive tax, but that's the government, again, trying to control media and giving money to media that they deem appropriate. Even during the election, they did that. So there's a bigger philosophical issue here that I think the Americans are upset about. And I just don't think it's the type of thing that we should be doing to respond to the steel taxes and the other taxes that Trump is doing. We have other tools in the toolbox that we can use, and those are the ones we should be using. So this is a no-brainer. Just cancel it.
Just cancel it. Okay, well, that's issue number one. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back in just 2 minutes with Dan Donovan, the editor and publisher of Ottawa Life magazine. I'm going to ask him how he thinks Carney's doing. I'm going to ask him what he thought about the election. I'm going to ask him about what he thinks the strategy with Donald Trump and tariffs should be. Stay with us, everyone. This will be a really good conversation to sort of put everything that's going on in Canada today in perspective with a foremost commentator on what's going on from a political standpoint in Canada, Don Donovan. Stay with us. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I've got Dan Donovan, who is the editor and publisher of Ottawa Life magazine, with us tonight. He is a very well-known commentator on the Canadian political scene. He's Ottawa's journalist of note because of his opportunity to comment in Ottawa Life magazine. He's a former parliamentarian. He worked on Parliament Hill as a staffer, and I had the privilege of going a couple of times to comedy clubs with him because he has a stand-up comedy background, which is, I think, fascinating. Dan, how do you think Carney's doing so far?
I think he's doing very well. And who'd have thought, even 6 months ago, that we'd have the situation we're in? But, it's like that old saying, a week is a lifetime in politics. And I think because it's the Canada Day weekend, it is interesting to reflect on this, what transpired. I mean, 6 months ago, the Liberal Party was being into the autopsy room to have an autopsy on, and they were basically dead. I think that came down to just severe dislike of the former Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, and his policies. And at one point, he was running below 10%, and he was going to get wiped out. And Mr. Poilievre, as we know, was going to be elected. Fast forward a couple of months, Mr. Carney wins the leadership there. I wrote about this at the time. This wasn't really a race. This was relatively preordained. That Mr. Carney came in and he was elected under their rules. But I think the main thing that happened when Mr. Carney got elected was a change in tone. And I think it goes back to that whole idea of if you're negative, a lot of people don't like negative. And so right away we noticed a change in tone with Mr. Carney. And I think the second thing we noticed was a return to competence. We had the Trudeau cabinet, which seemed to be like this ongoing, really bad high school play with these really amateurish people in government. And then all of a sudden, Carney gets in, and the change in tone was immediate. The change in the way he did business was immediate. He put forward some serious cabinet ministers right up front, and just a couple of those. We have Hodgson over at Energy. Now, this is after the election, of course. David McGuinty, who I've said for years, I know David. He's of course a brother of the former Premier of Ontario, a very smart political operative, an MP for 20 years, a lawyer. He should have been in the Trudeau cabinet years ago, but they didn't like competency. That's probably why they kept him out. He's a new defense minister. He spent some time as a public security minister. He was a late appointment to the game. The last cabinet shuffle with Trudeau in February, when Chrystia Freeland, who is probably the cabinet minister that most reminds me of running tinfoil across her teeth, when she was surreptitiously, I don't know, dropped or fired from the cabinet or whatever happened there, went nowhere in the leadership race. But anyways, he brought Trudeau brought in David McGuinty and then Nathaniel Erskine Smith. Interestingly, Erskine Smith is the housing minister, was dropped then by Carney when Carney won the election. But all that to say, the Conservatives blew it big time. They were going in. They were headed towards a majority government. They didn't pivot in time, and I don't think they recognized that Mr. Carney was different. I don't think they recognize they've been so used to dealing with a person who lacks substance, Mr. Trudeau. And then they didn't pivot in time to recognize and deal with Mr. Carney for the person he was. And I think that's why they lost.
But they only lost by
Interestingly,
2 points.
well, yes and no. I mean, they were on the road to winning a massive majority. So what Mr. Carney pulled off was quite exceptional. Interestingly enough, too, Brian, only 7 NDP seats. So the NDP party went down in flames. No surprise to anybody. They have 7 members, so they don't even have right now. They're not even an official opposition party, so they don't get any funding for staffing and all these kinds of things. So they've pawned their birthright right now. They are going to vote with the Liberals no matter what happens for the next 4 or 5 years. They have no choice because they can't afford to do another election with the NDP right now because they'll get wiped out. So they're pretty well tied to the Liberals.
On this Bill C4 or whatever it is, and I'd love to chat with you about that as well. They actually voted against the Liberals. It was the Conservatives that voted with the Liberals to pass it.
Well, of course, you're talking about the new government, the shenanigans of the new government, and interestingly enough, here's what I find interesting: Carney is putting in a lot of policies and making a lot of moves that the Conservatives wanted to do. So what that signals is he's moving back to the center from the far left of the NDP route that Jagmeet Singh took the NDP. That was a disaster for their party, and this includes things like just brain dead economic policy. His idea for jobs was to have government jobs. They are, along with a wing of the Liberal Party, the most anti-Semitic party in Canada. They're virulently anti-Jewish, and I think that really hurt them at the polls. And he got wiped out. And then Mr. Carney came in. He's taken the party to the center in a number of things. Right away on defense, he's hit the mark with the issues related to our funding in NATO and some other things. His tone with Mr. Trump has been very interesting, and I think Canadians like that. I know I like it. I think it's respectful, responsible, but he's no putz. He made it really clear to Mr. Trump that this is an opportunity for Canada. We have to do what's in Canada's interest, and I think really that's the lesson so far. The Carney government. We'll see if it's true when the rubber hits the road. But the Americans have made it very clear that they're always going to do, even when it comes to Canada, what's in their interest, and that's fine. But that means that we need to do what's in our interest.
Dan, I want to ask you, given your experience in Ottawa, given your experience on Parliament Hill, how difficult is it to do what Carney did? I've been in business a long time, and I've worked for and with CEOs that are really experienced individuals in business that come into a new job. Not many of them, even really experienced CEOs, could have within months of a new job done something like a throne speech, chair a G7, and go to a NATO conference and dramatically change the whole budget in regards to GDP, defense spending as a percentage of GDP, the way that Carney has. Like a lot of very experienced CEOs couldn't have come into a job as successfully as he did, as quickly as he did. How difficult was that for him? Or do you think no problems?
And a great lineup there of things you just mentioned. I'd also mention one other thing, Brian. And he met with Trump early, and he met with Trump and handled that very gracefully. It's difficult. It shows his experience. I think it also highlights what a jokester of a PM and a disastrous government we had the 10 years previous. And it also highlights the collective amnesia the Canadian population had during the election. It's almost like they said, let's just forget the last 10 years happened. Let's just forget about this Trudeau guy. And this is a new day with this new guy, even though he's in the same party. So what you're seeing here is a guy come into the job. Remember, Carney was in government before. He's the governor of the Bank of Canada. Then he was the governor of the Bank of England. He was the governor of the Bank of Canada when we went through the financial crisis in 2008. He worked very closely with Prime Minister Harper and the late great Jim Flaherty, who actually both those guys were on a cover issue of our magazine, of Ottawa Life magazine, back in the time about the economic recovery that they adjudicated during the great financial crisis of 2008. So this is a person, I think, who Canadians thought, okay, this is a serious person. Let's see what he can do. He was very savvy in having the king come here to do the throne speech. But I think that also speaks to, I mean, I suppose the king might have come anyways, but Carney was known in England. He was the governor of the Bank of England. King Charles, then Prince Charles, of course, was against England leaving the EU, as was Carney, although, Prince Charles can't say that sort of publicly, but he was against it. So they would be natural allies in that regard. Charles loves Canada. Bringing him here was really politically smart. So doing the defense thing with NATO, recognizing right away that we need to protect our Arctic, that we have underfunded our military, that we've become an embarrassment internationally. So right away with Carney on that stage, it brings some heft to Canada's game. You could see at the Kananaskis Summit, Mr. Carney, he knew a lot of the leaders. They seemed to be fond of him. They seemed to be, maybe that's not the best word, but respectful. They were respectful of him. He was respectful of them. So all of that plays in our favor. But for me, it's very important. It's very important. It's not easy to do, but it's still window dressing. I think the tough stuff is still to come. The tough stuff is when the rubber hits the road. The tough stuff is we haven't had a budget in a year. He has not brought in a budget. He's committed to $94 billion in additional spending without the approval of Parliament. We're not having a spring budget, apparently. We're having a fall budget. We still have a $1.2 trillion debt. We still have $60 billion to finance that debt every year. So we still have Bill C-69. He says he wants to do big, bold things. But Bill C-69 is going to stop all of those big, bold things, and they haven't rescinded it. We still have people who lack oxygen in the cabinet, namely Stephen Guilbeault. The new immigration minister seems to be dumber than a bag of hammers. And we still have some deadwood, like from the last government, Chrystia Freeland being one of them. So, I think he's earned, because he won the election, he's earned a year to show what he can do. But we still have high food inflation, serious housing problems, serious crime in our cities. These are issues he has to tackle, and I think he has earned the right to show that he can come up with an agenda to tackle those.
I guess the economy doesn't look very good. The statistics came out that 2 months in a row now we've got negative GDP growth. The only reason why the third month previous wasn't negative is because people were buying ahead of a fear of tariffs. Now, 2 months doesn't equal the technical definition of a recession. You got to have 2 quarters to be technically deemed a recession, but it certainly is not great. I'm talking to lots of people that are looking at layoffs within the housing business. The housing business is just dead right now, both multifamily as well as single family. Windsor, I've got business dealings in Windsor. Windsor is really worried about what's going to happen from an auto standpoint. What do you think he can do from an economic standpoint in the short term?
Well, it's a funny thing, Brian, because of the business we're in. Like, I follow different people to sort of for insight on these things, and I think you may have had this guy in your show once, but there's a guy I follow on the housing stuff. His name is Ron Butler, and this guy he's got the stats. He gives daily, weekly, uply reports on his little TikTok podcast about the housing crisis. It's bad across the country. But I think my concern with it is not only is it just horrible for the construction industry right now, and it's horrible for families and for homes, especially in the GTA, but in other major cities across the country. But I think the bigger problem I have, and this is why I'm saying I'm waiting, the government response to this, Mr. Carney's response so far has been, well, we're creating a new Ministry of Housing. And that does not get me up and enthusiastic about us fixing the housing crisis in this country. They also have right now a Minister of Housing from the former mayor of Vancouver, who one of his first statements was that he didn't think the problem with the housing crisis was the cost of housing. So I think that guy, that made me just do a bit of a step back and go, okay, well, why is this guy the housing minister? Because that's the obvious problem with housing. It's not affordable. So I think we have to wait and see, but I think we have to do things to make housing more affordable. And a lot of that, Mr. Carney can have some control over if they're smart, because a lot of the problems in the housing are related to developer fees, taxes and taxation, bureaucratic process, timelines to get shovels in the ground and get things built. Then there's another bigger problem with the condos in the GTA and other places across the country being controlled by corporations who are driving small home builders out of the market. I don't think that, I think we have to have a look at why corporations are owning so many condo buildings in Canada and controlling the market. So now, what Carney's done that's smart is he's brought in Michael Sabia to be the new clerk of the Privy Council. A lot of people don't know this, but Sabia used to be in government. He was, I believe, the assistant clerk under Paul Tellier over 20 years ago. Sabia's Caisse de Depot in Quebec, Bell, he's got immense business experience, plus being a senior former bureaucrat, and he's a no-nonsense guy. And I think Carney brought him in to clear the way and to get stuff moving in the government. And that's what I'm hoping he's going to do this summer. Remember, under Trudeau, the bureaucracy in Canada almost doubled. It went from 231,000 people to over 445,000, closing in on 450,000 people. It cost us $70 billion a year to pay these bureaucrats. We have 7 layers of government in the federal government in most departments, and nothing's moving. So we got a bunch of highly overpaid bureaucrats, and there has to be a real tackling of the federal bureaucracy. They want to keep the entrepreneurial bureaucrats and the ones who can get stuff done and get rid of the deadwood. And they're going to have to do that through attrition, possibly through some layoffs, but they need to get the federal public service working again. It went down the crapper under Trudeau, and that's just a fact.
It's amazing if go back to Sabia for a second, that gentleman, I think he's 70 or over 70 years old. He was chairman of Hydro-Quebec. Before that, he was head of the Caisse de Depot. Why would a guy like that leave Hydro-Quebec, a very attractive job, and become clerk of the Privy Council? One, I think, would only think he would do so if he really thought that he and Carney together could make some pretty radical changes in the Canadian economy.
Look, I think only one thing comes to mind. I think duty. This is a gentleman who's had a storied career in the public and private sector. That you're right. I mean, why would he at this stage in his life agree to do this? But I think he's known Carney in the past. He's worked with him on other things. The country's in trouble. Sabia has a high degree of respect in people, both in the private sector and public sector. He's tested, he's proven, and I think I actually believe he's doing it because out of duty and for the country, because Carney needs good wingmen to get in there and that can get things done. And like I said, I mentioned a couple of them in the cabinet that he's got. He's also got some deadwood. But I also think Zabia is going to be on the same page as Carney like this. They want people that produce and deliver. And I think what they're going to do is go back to the sort of Chrétien Martin type of government and Harper, where they're going to allow the ministers to run their ministries. They're going to put demands on senior public servants, and they're going to have very little patience for people that don't deliver and do their jobs and start to get things moving. I think they'll very quickly move people aside who are proved to be incompetent or who can't get the job done. And that's what we need is a return. We need a return to that. I said, after the election on another show that my hope is that Mr. Carney governs more like the Chrétien Martin did in the mid to late 90s when they really, for the first time in a long time, fixed Canada's fiscal framework and got us in a really good position, that he governs more like that than in his book he wrote called Values, which is just, frankly awful. It's all this, real left wacky stuff. So I'm hoping he's more of a pragmatist. So far, he's proving to be more of a pragmatist in terms of the way he's doing things.
We're going to take a break for some messages and be back in just 2 minutes with Dan Donovan. He's the editor and publisher of Ottawa Life, talking about where Canada is today. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. Just thought it would be really good with Canada Day to give an overview of where we are from a political standpoint, economic standpoint across the country. And my guest to take us through that is Dan Donovan. He is the editor and publisher of Ottawa Life magazine. Dan, if people want to read some of your articles, is your magazine online?
OttawaLife.com. OttawaLife.com. We're online 24/7. We also are on social media. And please go to the site, and there's all kinds of interesting articles on a variety of matters, including politics, arts, sports, news. We're in our 28th year, and I think we cover the capital and a lot of issues in the country with an interesting perspective.
What's your cover story this month?
Well, frankly, it's about people of influence in the capital. And we're going to be putting that out early July. It's there are a number of female influencers in Ottawa that are having a significant impact on the nation's agenda, including Christian Cianfieri, who's with the Canadian Association of Defence Industries, Jennifer Stewart, who is one of the top consultants / type lobbyists here in Ottawa with Syntax Strategy. Sonia Shorey, who's with a group called Invest Ottawa. We've named the head of the new Ottawa Jewish Federation as one of those people. There's a number of people that are having a significant impact here. The Canadian ambassador to Washington, Goldie Hyder, who is the head of the Business Council on National Issues. Goldie Hyder is a very influential person in business in Canada, has been a key player in the trade issues with Trump. Of course, they're doing everything they can to keep things stable, with the relationship. But Goldie is interesting and the Business Council of National Issues are interesting. They were formerly, the head of that was a guy named Tom DeCino, who is a Herculean presence in Canada in terms of government and business. DeCino was responsible for working and getting the free trade agreement through back in 1988, and then in the early 90s, the Mexico-Canada-U.S. deal. So these are people in Ottawa that are having an impact on the new Carney government. It's interesting, Brian, if we can just talk about that Trump thing again. Like, they put these tariffs. You were mentioning the steel tariffs and aluminum tariffs earlier, but one of the things Carney's done. Let's face it, the vast, like over 80% of our trade is done, the important trade is done with the United States. So, we just can't pretend that we can just do things to the United States and it's not going to impact us. It is going to impact us. But what Carney's doing is important. He's saying, look, the Americans are basically casting us aside, saying we're no different than anyone else, and that's fine. So it's making us grow up and say, okay, we gotta take care of Canada first, which I actually agree with. He's doing that on the defense side. He's doing that with our allies. He's doing the Arctic. Here's an interesting thing. In the Arctic, the United States has still refused to acknowledge our Arctic territorial boundaries. That's a fact. They will not acknowledge our Arctic territorial boundaries. I think that's something we need to get them to do. And I would just point out that in a recent interview we did with the Chinese ambassador in Ottawa, we asked him that question. We said, "Do you respect Canada's territorial boundaries in the Arctic?" And there was no hesitation. He just said, "Yes, of course we do." So, there are things, the America's still our best friend, yada, 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 but they're our friend. They're not family, and we need to make sure that their interest in our Arctic, which, we have a lot of things we need to protect, including the environment in the Arctic. It's a very sensitive environment, but we need to protect Canada first. The Americans recently, and I'm the least anti-American guy I know, but I will say, at a certain point, it's like back off. The Americans, you may recall this, Trump was saying outside of making Canada the 51st state, which is another thing Carney handled very well. They at the same time they were saying they want Greenland. Trump, well, we want Greenland, we'll buy Greenland, we think it's in our interest to have a Greenland. Now, that not only pissed off the small population in Greenland who do not want that, it also really upset the Danes, who, of course, have sovereignty over Greenland. Greenland is part of Denmark. So, and it also, upset the Norwegians and other Arctic countries. So, one of the things the Carney people are looking at is an alliance between Canada, Norway, Denmark to secure the Arctic, to make sure it's secured for resource development and environmental protection and other things. Another thing that whole 51st state Greenland thing did is it sort of put a wedge in. And Carney's mentioned this. Why are we spending 80% of our defense budget in the United States? Maybe we ought to be looking at other countries. Now, we have to do what's in our interest. That brings up the issue of the F-35. Well, we've already committed to the F-35. But the thing that came out this winter was apparently the Americans who make the F-35 have a kill switch on it, and they can control the software on it. So if they don't want the countries they sell it to fly it, they can actually stop it from flying. That's not a very good thing. So there's been a big discussion about that. Is that true? Apparently it is true. Is it in our interest to be buying the F-35s? We've already committed to 16 of them. We're supposed to buy 88. So others have been saying, well, maybe we should be buying the Swedish Gripen jet instead of that and doing this thing in the Arctic with the Gripen jet. The problem, of course, with that is that really smart militarily to do? Is it in our interest to at this point on those types of big purchases to not align with the Americans? And I think there's a strong case to be made that it wouldn't be a smart thing, that we should continue our F-35 purchases and hope that, we assume the relationship with the Americans on the security front is going to continue the way it has. And so these are all the questions that Carney is engaged in. I've mentioned earlier Mr. McGuinty. David McGuinty's a good guy to have in that file. They'll figure that out. But the point of all of this is this. We have a ban right now on EVs from China. This is where there's some incongruity with the Carney stuff. They passed a thing last week, again in the House, where they doubled down on Canada getting, having a priority for EV vehicles. Here's a clue. People in Canada are not buying EV vehicles the way that this government wants them to, because there's no infrastructure to plug the damn things in most of the country. And they don't work as well in the winter. Duh. Okay. But they doubled down on stupid and reimposed and recommitted to this EV mandate. Now, we have also at the same time banned the most successful country in the world that builds EVs from coming into Canada. That would be China. China is building the most advanced EVs in the world today. They're incredible cars. I was in China 2 months ago. I went to a couple of Chinese car factories. It's unbelievable, the quality of these cars, the price of these cars. But here's the difference. In China, they have the infrastructure in place across the country. It was done in tandem with the building of the cars. They have infrastructure to charge them. Okay. We didn't do that in Canada. We didn't roll it out properly. They also have the rare earth minerals to build the batteries. So in Canada, we took this really obtuse approach where we just said, oh, we're going to spend $53 billion of taxpayer money, give it to these car corporations, and we're going to build battery plants, which is like in the auto sector chapter of how not to do things. That's in the chapter called Dumb and Dumber. Okay, it just doesn't work. It didn't work, and all of these companies now that apparently said they were going to build these batteries are all backing out. So my point is this: why have we put a 100% tariff on Chinese auto products? China turned around after we did that and put a massive tariff on our canola products and some of our beef and pork exports going to China. China is our second largest trading partner. So I think the government, I'm not saying that we should drop the EV ban on China. You people who are listening to your show in Southern Ontario say, well, yeah, but it protects the Canadian auto industry. That's why they did it. It protects the American, Canadian, and Mexican auto industry. Well, it used to, but the auto industry is changing dramatically. So maybe we need to get out in front of it and we need to start doing partnerships with Chinese companies and other Asian companies that are building EVs, do partnerships here to allow them to build their vehicles here and to help us get the technology right so we can build out the EV infrastructure across the country. Those are the kinds of discussions that the Carney government needs to be having, and I think they are going to start having.
There's a lot of economic files that are pretty important, and I think they need to be addressed. There's no question. And I think you're right. This Minister Hodgson, who's come in from Goldman Sachs, a top investment banker, someone who had worked with Carney before. I think they have added a lot of heft to both the PMO as well as to the cabinet. And so I look forward to seeing what the progress is on some of these files. I've interviewed someone most recently that was suggesting what we need is an auto pact to be negotiated between Canada and China to replace what we're going to be losing clearly in auto manufacturing if Trump is successful with his strategy and we're not successful in beating him back from his strategy and moving auto manufacturing back to the United States. We're going to take a final break, and come back with some concluding comments with Dan Donovan, the editor and publisher of Ottawa Life magazine. I'm going to ask him about the future of Pierre Poilievre, because that's obviously pretty important as well. By-election coming up. Came within 2 points of being prime minister, but came from a 25-point lead to 2 points behind, and I think is doing even worse in the public opinion polls today. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I've got Dan Donovan with us tonight. He is the editor, publisher of Ottawa Life magazine, and I highly recommend you check it out online. It's a great magazine. And Dan is an incredible commentator on what's going on from a political standpoint in Canada. Dan, I got to ask you, you were very positive about Pierre Poilievre, I remember, prior to Justin Trudeau's departure. In just conversations with people, and not partisan people, just, I was at the Albany Club recently, frankly, in Toronto, a bastion of Tory people. And a lot of people were saying, maybe not publicly, but they were saying they couldn't imagine Pierre Poilievre in that role at Kananaskis, chairing the G7. What do you think the future is of Pierre Poilievre? Lots of them are saying, again, not publicly, but that the ick factor that people have talked about, the chomping on the apple, that not resonating with females, you mentioned it yourself, the negativity. What do you think the future of Pierre Poilievre is? He came from a 25 or something point lead to losing by 2 points to now down by something like 20 points. What's your sense of his future?
Well, I think the first thing with Mr. Poilievre is you should not underestimate him. And I think that there are lessons learned from him in this election, but regardless of what's going on right now, I don't think that anyone can discount the impact he's had in the Conservative Party. He did very well. He got almost half of the Canadian population behind him. So, and I don't think his leadership, and in 6 months, I might be walking this back, but I don't think right now his leadership is in danger. I personally think his problem during the campaign was some of the people running the campaign, but at the end of the day, it's also him. They didn't pivot in time. Mr. Polyev, I wrote a feature on him, last year about his career, and he's one of the great things that he has done, he's proven that he can do, is learn from his mistakes. And he's shown that time and time again. So I am nowhere near closing the door on Mr. Polyev. And in fact, a number of the things, including getting rid of the carbon tax that Mr. Carney has done, are a direct result of what Mr. Polyev did. And I find it funny as a media person that when Mr. Carney got rid of the carbon tax, the headline wasn't Polyev is successful in getting the Tories to rescind the carbon tax. That's why politics is so unfair. It's Mark Carney is getting rid of the carbon tax, and Carney was the author of the carbon tax with Trudeau. So it's just the irony of politics. But I think Mr. Polyev took a major hit here. He also lost his seat in Ottawa Carleton. And just on that, we've talked about this with Elections Canada as well. There were over 80 people on the ballot in Mr. Polyev's riding. Now he was going to lose that riding anyways to the Liberal candidate there, who ran a really good campaign. Based on the numbers, like he lost by, don't quote me on this, around over 3,000 votes, 3,400 votes. But this group targeted his riding and had 80 candidates on the ballot. And Elections Canada has to look into that, whether it's Mr. Polyev or an NDP person or a Liberal person. Actually, it wasn't in this election, because they are against the first past the post system. They said they were doing that as a protest. But you cannot weaponize the ballot like that to try to shake an election. And I think Elections Canada they're probably investigating it now. Now, here's one of the good things, though, Brian, that came out of this Polyev Carney thing. Both after the English and French debate and after the election, Mr. Carney and Mr. Polyev were very civil to each other. I talked earlier about the tone and tonality of the new government and of Mr. Carney, and I think I think this is an important thing that Polyev he started to do and needs to continue to do, which is to be more civil and not the attack dog impression that he leaves people. One of the most important things I saw after the election, and it's still very important today, that Mr. Carney did is, when Polyev lost, and let's face it, politics can be tough. He's got family, he's got two small kids, he spent 3 years traveling the country, he's spoken to hundreds of thousands of Canadians, and then he lost. He won, but he lost. He lost the election, he won increases in the vote and all that. But he lost. Mr. Carney said right away, almost within a day or two, a couple of days of the election, that if the Conservatives, if an MP stepped down, and that has happened, to make way for Mr. Polyev to run in a by-election, Mr. Carney said, I will call a by-election as soon as possible to allow Mr. Polyev to have an opportunity to get back in the House as a Tory leader. And, that's what they call the high road. And I think there's a lesson there. And we need to return to civil discourse in our parliament. We need to return to respectful discourse. We need to be able to agree to disagree agreeably. These are all principles of our parliament. I think Mr. Carney's from that school. He's been good and impressive in the House so far. And he also needs to extend that further in terms of, following the rules of the House, making sure you're putting a budget forward because you're required by law to put a budget forward and these types of things. But Mr. Polyev, I'm not writing him off at all. I think that if Mr. Carney doesn't turn things around in a year, we could be back to the future with Mr. Polyev. So he gets his shot again. And some Tories I think they're more, what I'm hearing is they're more disenfranchised and unhappy with the team around Mr. Polyev, and they want to see changes. But at the end of the day, it's the leader is the leader, and they have to take responsibility for it.
Dan, we've got a war in the Middle East. We've got a war in Eastern Europe. We've got concerns about China attacking Taiwan. We've got a trade war, it would appear, with our closest neighbor and biggest trading partner in the United States. Our economy's got 2 months of negative growth. We've got a housing crisis. We've got tax issues. We've got debt and deficit issues. Where are you right now? Are you optimistic about Canada or are you pessimistic about Canada?
Um, hard to, that's a tough question. I'm really kind of depressed about it, about the situation when I see, for example, in our big cities, the drug issues, the some of the disgusting behavior in public transit, the lack of, I think we have very poor municipal government and people focused on the wrong things. I'm very concerned about food inflation. I'm very concerned about the housing. But I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that Mr. Carney can turn it around. I'm an optimist, so I'm hopeful he can turn around. I see the steps he's taken, the macro steps, like we talked about on defense and internationally. I think those are positive. I think so far the way he's dealt with Mr. Trump, and by the way, I think what Mr. Trump is doing is working for America. So we just got to make sure our response to it is working for Canada. The positive things I see, the current government has definitely come out and taken a stand on the Israel-Gaza conflict and the right for a democratic country like Israel to defend itself. I think they're concerned about the awful anti-Semitism and hatred in our streets by some of these jihadi nutbars that are walking around calling for the death to the Jews, and that has to stop in our country. They're weaponizing the charter. So I'm hopeful that we're going to start changing on those things. But I am concerned for the younger generation. I'm concerned. I'm really counting on this government. They need to move very quickly. I'm not talking like years here. I'm talking months to right this ship. Or I think we're going to have some serious problems here. Even look in Alberta. I'm not. I think a lot of the things Danielle Smith, people in central Canada and especially in the media are fond of attacking Premier Smith. I think she's spot on a lot of the things she's saying. She's like the canary in the coal mine. We need to get government out of industry, and we need to get this economy going, and we need to have the federal government stop interfering so much in the province's economic development.
Dan Donovan, editor and publisher of Ottawa Life magazine. That's been a great review of what's going on in Canada today. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much again for joining us. That's our show for tonight, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online at www.saga960am.ca and get me even in Ottawa. And all my podcasts and videos go up on my website, briancrombie.com, as soon as the radio show goes to air. I'm on YouTube, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on social media, and I'm on lots of podcast servers. One of these days, maybe you'll put me on Ottawa Life magazine. Good night, everybody. Happy Canada Day.